before we talk about longing, hypocrisy, and how they're connected to philosophy, or basically just the human condition, a couple of things. Make sure you watch the soccer game today, Iran versus the US. It starts at 11. Make sure that deep down you're praying or rooting for Iran. That's very important. Do not pretend to be enlightened where you are. You don't have a position, you're neutral. You just say, oh, don't be a Taoist. It won't work. It doesn't go well with human nature. It's only for hippies. The other thing is, in Persian traditional music, we have a thing called pish daramad, which means daramad is the introduction, pish daramad is pre-introduction. That before the singers can actually sing, they need to be stirred. They need to be put in a particular emotional state. And so the music that starts playing for the first maybe 10, 15 minutes kind of puts the singer in a particular mood where he or she can start singing. And I think the classroom setting is very much the same. That it's very difficult for me to come to class and just all of a sudden, without any pre-introduction, just talk about longing or talk about hypocrisy. Like anything else in life, you turn on the engine, you let it run for 5-10 minutes, or maybe a minute, and then you drive it. Everything needs to kind of be heated before you can use it. So if sometimes you wonder as to why I take a few minutes before talking about something or go around asking people if they have any questions, is really I just want to get warmed up. I can't just move into things as quickly. So I'm not quite sure when the movie Moana came about, a few years ago. And I guess if you really want to understand philosophy, books will help, but you need someone first to teach you how to think well, and books can't really do that. You need someone to create certain emotions inside you and then protect those emotions, and then when you mature, have you think about those emotions the proper way. And then when that job is done, then you can start watching movies. They're the best books you could ever read. So it's about this young girl named Moana, and she's stuck. She's a really, really nice young girl, but she's stuck between two very, very difficult positions where she ultimately has to make a choice. One is to follow tradition or to follow the voice within. She loves her parents. She doesn't want to disappoint them, especially her father, who happens to be the chief of this particular clan. She also has a grandmother who is crazy. Crazy in the sense that she's a magician. She is what we call a rishi, a sage, a seer. She sees the past. She sees how the past plays into the present. And she also sees the future. That if the present continues the way it's going, the future will be disastrous. Also, that there are some people who have a destiny. Not everyone, but some people have a destiny. They're meant to do something in this life. And they are tortured from within, and they have a very, very difficult task, especially if they have a good relationship with their parents. Do they want to continue this relationship with their parents, upholding the tradition, carrying the tradition on their back, or listening to the voice within? So let's go back to the beginning, which is the father is on this boat with his friend, and they are sea travelers. They like being on the water, open space. And as all young kids do once in a while, behind their parents' back or without them knowing, him and his friend go on this boat. All of a sudden, the sea becomes really, really rough. The boat is turned upside down or maybe just broken, destroyed, and the friend hits his head to the rock at the bottom of the sea and dies. And this young man, who later will be the father and the chief of this clan, swims to the shore and is haunted by what he had done and how he was responsible really for the death of his best friend. It's always also difficult to be a nomad, which means that it's nice to be, in the ocean, watching the birds, watching the waves. But the truth is, human beings desire stability. We need dry ground. So eventually they find this piece of property. It's very lush. It's very calming, very peaceful. And they make that land their home. And because the chief doesn't want anyone to repeat his mistakes, what he does is he says, people can go into the sea, but they can't go beyond this particular point. So you have a man who lives in this tradition that says, sea is really your home. You can go wherever. You can do whatever. The sea is your friend. But you have one bad negative experience that removes the story, this narrative, that yes, the sea could be your friend, but it could also be your worst enemy. So despite the fact that you have this tradition for thousands of years that says, you're made for the water, and your home really should be your boat, and let the water carry you, let the sun be your guide, let the wind move you, but there comes a point where this man says, no, it's far too dangerous. And I guess to some extent that has to do with the fact that when you lose your faith, you come to realize that perhaps some things are happening accidentally. They're not meant to be taken place by the hands of God. That maybe his friends died because that's what the gods wanted. The gods wanted this kid and his friend to be on the sea, to go on this boat ride, for the boat to turn upside down, for him to survive, so that he could later on protect his people, and for his friend to pass away, so he could understand the value of friendship, that life is very short, he should be very cautious. But that's not the way he sees it. He just feels responsible. So he creates a brand new tradition that, yes, at one point we used to be voyagers, we used to be travelers on water, but no more. That stage in our life has ended. We have this land and this is our home. And little by little you forget. You forget your origins, you forget your history. And so this young man eventually becomes the chief of this clan. He gets married and they have a daughter. Her name is Moana. She's very strange in the sense that she hears a voice within. No other kid in the tribe can hear this. She has this longing. And her longing has to do with, I want to be near water. I want to, in fact, be in the water. I want to be around water. The land is not my home. So there is a scene where the grandmother is telling the story about possibly the end of days, what we call eschatology, where the world as you know it will come to an end. So at the beginning of the story, this grandmother is telling the story about water, monsters, and all the kids in the room are really, really frightened. They begin to scream. They begin to run. Moana, on the other hand, because she's a lover of water and she doesn't even know why, she loves the story. She loves all the horrors that come with the story. She enjoys it. So before we continue, consider the following. Imagine you're sitting in a classroom and someone is talking about Plato. And you have a student over there to the left, and he kind of yawns and falls asleep and says, what a ridiculous story. You have another student in the back saying, man, how could Socrates damage Plato in such a way? And then you have another student in the back to the right, just sitting back, and he or she gets teary-eyed and says, raises their hand and says, where can I go to find the Socrates? So what you have at the very beginning of life is that people come with different temperaments. We don't know why some people are the way they are. Most people, in general, enjoy conformity, enjoy being followers, enjoy looking at the signs and just following them. They enjoy GPS. You know, if your instructor says, do this assignment, I want it to be in an MLA format, font 25, color has to be pink, that's what you do. And I want to just summarize what Plato has said in his allegory of the cave. That's what you do, you summarize it. If you happen to be somewhat, I suppose, weird, you'll say, yes, I assume my father to live a long life so that he could see me get married, be around his grandkids, but one day he comes home and he says, I have cancer, I'm going to die. And then all of a sudden, I begin to think thoughts that my illusions, my assumptions about my father having a long life, all of them have been destroyed, because all of a sudden my father's news is like a light bulb. Goes off into my head, and I realize that, oops, life is short, I need to do something really fast before I lose my father. So at the very outset, what you have is all these students looking at each other. The student over there cheering up, wanting to be a Plato, wanting to find a Socrates, looks at the students over there and says to himself, I don't want to have all these emotions running in my veins. I want to be like those people over there. I want to be a conformist. I want to follow. I want to assimilate and have other people think for me, talk for me, decide for me. And then you have the student over there who's somewhat callous and his life lacks meaning. He looks at the student to the right and says, man, I don't know what's about the story that has made that guy cry in the back. I want to be like that. I want to come to life. I want to be passionate. I want my life to have meaning. And so you have a good amount of resentment, envy, jealousy. And these are all normal and natural things that people kind of experience. But what you need to understand at the outset is this. 99.9% of the people are born to follow. That's how they are. And you can't change that. 1% of the world population, they are there to rebel. They hear a voice from a world unknown, unseen. They just feel as if they are meant to do something, they just don't know what. That's the story of Moana. Okay. Now, throughout the movie, every time she gets very, very close to the sea, to the water, her father comes, picks her up, and takes her back to the dry land. Parents are really, really, really scared. Parents, all parents, eventually will become a conformist. Why? They want to protect kids, their children, from the world unknown. It's great that you love music. Just don't major in music, because I don't know if there'll be a job for you. You love philosophy, good for you. Just don't major in philosophy. Go into business. There are jobs there for you. You want to study religious studies, great. Read a couple of books on the side. Why don't you major in psychology and eventually become a therapist? That's what parents want. They don't want to see their kids suffer. Okay? The story of the Buddha is really, 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 really great. But you should always listen to the story of the Buddha, not from the Buddhist monks. Do not listen to the story of the Buddha being expressed by the Dalai Lama. No offense, Tenzin. Do not listen to the story of the Buddha given to you by any monk. Why? Because the Buddha was married. Because the Buddha had a wife. He had a child. He had parents he loved. He had people he loved. Do you know how difficult it is to walk away from the things that you love? And to walk away, it means that you must have great longing and yearning within. And there is this conflict. Do I stay with my parents or do I follow the voice within? See, if you're like the Dalai Lama when you're snatched at the age of 2, that you haven't really formed a great relationship with your parents, with your people, with the land. You've never been married, you don't have a child. You don't know what it means to love. You have this abstract idea of love, but it's never really touched you. Okay? And this is really, really difficult for Moana's parents. For some strange reason, she is touched by forces that are unknown to us. She's born, she's made for the sea. She knows who she is. She knows what she is. In other words, she knows her destiny to be on the water, do you see? And there are times when she runs up this hill because her father tells her, you're going to be the chief once I go. Once I die, you, Moana, will be the chief of this tribe. You have to guide the people, protect the people. And every time she goes to do this ritual so she can take over, so she can be a chief, she says, I really want to follow in the footsteps of my father. I just can't. Okay? So, 2 things. You're either born with a great longing within. It's what we call just being talented, being gifted, being graced, blessed, or maybe cursed. Or you'll be lucky, or perhaps you'll have the unfortunate experience of running into a Socrates who will inspire you. He will give you his or her own voice. It's not yours, it'll be his. But if you do things the right way, it'll become your passion. I'm not talking about people like Eminem and Snoop Dogg and Rihanna. Those are not the passionate, inspirational components I'm talking about. Socrates, Malcolm X, Mahatma Gandhi, Moana. Now, how does Moana resolve this conflict? Should I follow tradition or should I follow the voice that lives within? Well, you always need a jokester. You always need a jester. You always need a clown. You always need a satirist. And in this particular movie, the clown, the wise person who hides behind, just acting like a clown, is the grandmother. She doesn't fit. She makes fun of everything. She sees the future. And it's not looking good. She's looking for a savior. And she knows that the savior of the clan is Moana. And Moana goes to her and says, I have this longing, this yearning. I don't know where it comes from. But I want to be near water. I want to swim in the water. I want to go on a long journey on water. But I also love my parents. And you know what the grandmother does? Because the grandmother is old and she knows she's going to die at any time. And she looks at Moana, I'm paraphrasing, if you haven't loved, you haven't lived. And the only true way you can love is find a voice within and then pursue it. But if there is no voice inside you, just go back and do business. Don't try to be unique. Don't destroy your life. It's not worth it. And every time Moana goes to the grandmother and says, I want to just follow the tradition, he says, that's fine. You can do that. It's good. I think it's great. But don't you also hear a voice that comes from inside you? And then she once again remembers. And then the grandmother does something really, really awful. She opens the door, guides Moana into a cave, and Moana comes in the presence of all these beautiful boats. And then she has a vision that her people used to live, in fact, on the ocean. They were voyagers. And she makes this mistake of assuming that if she was to go back to her parents and the members of her tribe and she was to tell them her vision, they would embrace her, they would protect her, they will encourage her. She goes to them and says, what are we doing here? Dry land is not our home. We are sea voyagers. We are meant to be on water all the time. But the father, being haunted by an experience when he was 20, that he was responsible for the death of his best friend, he takes Moana and says, no, what the hell are you talking about? So let's stop here and let's talk about longing and hypocrisy. Let's talk about hypocrisy real quick because it's the easiest. And we'll talk about longing because it's a bit more complicated. Karl Marx, when his financial situation wasn't all that great, he wrote, and he wrote, and he wrote. Even when his 2-year-old child was dead, and when his wife Jenny asked him, can you go out there, get some money, buy a little coffin for our kid? He basically told her, I'm busy writing, I don't have time. Now, this may sound a little strange to you, but it's not really. First, because fathers are on the outside, and when you have a child who is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you really haven't had enough time to create a bond with them. It doesn't mean that you don't feel sad. It doesn't mean that you don't grieve. It just means that the connection that you need to make the grief really intense and to be able to mourn the way a mother mourns when she hears her son age 50 or 20 die, it's very, very different. They've had 20 years of bonding, whereas Karl Marx only had maybe a year of just seeing this kid. There came a point in Karl Marx's life where Engels, his best friend, gave him lots of money. For the first time, Karl Marx experienced privilege. What it means to have steak, what it means to have lobster, what it means to live in a mansion. Go to Hawaii, all that stuff. In those few years where he lived in privilege, he did not write a single paragraph. Does it really mean that in those 2 years, Karl Marx had forgotten poverty, people's suffering? that capitalists had stopped exploiting people? Of course not. Is he a hypocrite for not being true to his ideas and ideals? I think the word hypocrisy is reserved only for young people who have not lived enough and who have not had enough experience in life. You know, when you don't pay rent, when you don't pay for food, when you don't pay for school, and you live in this cradle of privilege when you can follow your dreams, when you can write and sing, play music and dance. You look at your mom and you say, Mom used to be a dancer, why did you stop? You're such a hypocrite. But you have no idea what motherhood does to you. You have no idea what fatherhood does to you. You have no idea what it means to work every day from 9 to 5 to be able to pay rent. Is it true that your son, your daughter, your friends who are relatively young will come to you and say, your life is a lie? You know, you tell me to be a musician, you used to be a musician, look at you, you're a bum. How could you stand yourself being such an enormous hypocrite? And the only answer you can give to your son or daughter is nothing. You just hope to God that one day, you know, they'll mature enough to see the complexities of life. Hypocrisy. Is Abraham a hypocrite for having more than one wife? Is David a hypocrite for having more than one wife and having concubines on the side? Is Solomon a hypocrite? Is Moses a hypocrite for not being around his kids? Is Martin Luther King Jr. a hypocrite for giving all these inspirational sermons and yet being with other people on the side while being married? Is Mahatma Gandhi a hypocrite? So let me quickly just tell you what it means to be a hypocrite and why someone would call another a hypocrite. I'm going to use myself as an example. Forgive me. You know, I come to this class, I say some things, I tell you stories, sometimes I'm very animated. True, some of you get bored, some of you become really excited and inspired, and you have, as our organism really demands, all of us in this class are looking for something that's beyond life, that gets us closer to beauty, to perfection. Sure. And it happens most often when you and I fall in love. Because when you fall in love with someone, you don't see the blemishes, you don't see the deformities, you don't see how crude and brute, immature, idiotic, infantile this person is. Love has this power to kind of just iron out all the wrinkles. It's what we call Hephaestus. She is the goddess or this blacksmith of the Greeks, where it connects you, welds you to this thing called beauty, where you can see an ounce of ugliness. And so I come to class, I talk about patience, I talk about how to observe anger, I talk about love, longing, being a seeker after truth. Some of you in this class may even have the false assumption that I have wisdom. Okay? And then you like coming to class because I connect you to something. You don't really know what it is, but I connect you to that. You can call it perfection, you can call it beauty, you can call it inspiration, the world of ideas. We can give it any label. And so you walk away from the class and you go to your parents and you say, I have this instructor, Amir Sabzavari. Man, he is just awesome. If Socrates was alive, would be really, really impressed because he's a carbon copy of Socrates. And in your fantasies, you assume that I never scream at my wife, I never lose my patience. In fact, I never use the bathroom. I never do anything wrong. What I say, I in fact do. My actions match my words. That's what all of us in this class desire. You know, that's one of the awful things that happens to Jesus Christ in the 20th century. Because when the culture became secular and they put, especially the four Gospels, under the microscope, they realized there are so many inconsistencies. And then other books began to appear. Let me give you an example. You know, for thousands of years, Jesus Christ has embodied this image of perfection. He doesn't have sex. He never loses his temper. He was never greedy. He never owned a house. He was always kind, compassionate. He truly was like a God. And imagine if you have had this image of Jesus Christ as the embodiment of perfection, beauty. And all of a sudden, you sit there and you listen to someone talk about Jesus Christ, but not within the context of the four Gospels, but Gospels you have never read.